it was Edra who was first to run to Osrith when she saw her adoptive mother's horse hove into view as she looked east from Dunnottar. Who she might have been watching for, Osrith did not dwell, probably Ildub, Constantine's elder son. If not him, someone else, for Edra was shocked when she realized the rider was Osrith. Along the fourth riverbank she came, red hair falling to her waist, and Osrith reckoned her to be 11 or 12 now, her face pale as milk, her eyes blue as the sky. Yet, unlike her mother, her face was rounder, her chin pointed with a dimple in it, like Buka and, like Buka, huge, bat-like ears. And, a blessing for her, Edra seemed to be free of the palsy that had afflicted Buka in his legs and arms. Osrith made a mental note to speak to Constantine about her, regarding her age. She knew the king would have made provision, or else considered St. Abbs, up the coast from Lindisfarne where, again one of her ancestors, had established a nunnery. Yet, she was half Danish, as well as English, and Edra must not be allowed to forget her mother's heritage. "Mater!" she exclaimed, and Osrith had allowed her to jump up into Grey Shadow, and sit in front of her, as the girl rattled to her about how pleased she was to see her, how she was learning Greek and Latin now, and could speak 5 languages, how she had learned the distaff and fix pigments, a skill needed for manuscript workers, though whether she had done anything other than make her own drawings with the valuable inks remained to be seen. Osrith had left her horse's weight in silver to Constantine that she be educated, and Edra showed off her Gaelish, before glancing at Bue's handle, reading the Ogham. "You should expand your Norse and Danish too," Osrith advised, as she ran a hand through her daughter's hair, listening to her tinkling laugh. "And the dresses arrived, Mater," Edra added. The dresses. They had been destined for Ethelfled. Bought, yes. Money had changed hands. But not a lot of trade negotiation had gone on. Osrith had taken the newly made gowns, demanding to know their worth, and pressed the money into the woman's surprised hands before sending them north with the promissory of more silver. Osrith was pleased that they had finally arrived with her daughter. "What do you do with your days?" Osrith asked, as they trotted on. Edra glanced across the water to Kuldis, and smiled. "I go to the monastery with the princes, and learn to read. I walk on the sand with Ildub, and we watch the birds." "And avoid Selak," Osrith mused. Except, Selak was old enough not to run around with his little brother and adopted sister. She hoped Constantine had put him to some use. Osrith mentioned Domhnall's last son. She remembered him, a small, shy boy who just wanted to be with Edra and Ildub. "He's a snivelling baby," Edra protested. "No dresses," Osrith replied, severely. Edra was spoiled by Constantine so often, it was difficult to offer discipline. "No dresses, unless you involve him." "But, he can't keep up," Edra protested. "We go to run in the woods." "Take him with you," Osrith explained, patiently. "It's no fun for running in the woods, he's too small. Rather than leave him crying, play a game for him. Then take him back to his nurses. He just wants a bit of your attention, then you and Ildub can go off for your game later." Osrith leaned forward and kissed her head. "Try? For me?" "Yes, Mater," Edra agreed, though whether she would remember or, in Edra's case, thought enough to be bothered was a different matter. Eswi trotted just behind her, stabling his horse almost as soon as he got to the stables, and strode off in the direction of Constantine's throne room. Edra would not leave Osrith's side. She had changed a little since Osrith was last at Dunnottar, and wanted to be beside her adoptive mother's side. When she was younger, Constantine was her only parent as far as Edra was concerned. "Edra," Osrith said, quickly, as they got to the hall doors. "There is something that I need to tell you, once I have spoken to Constantine." "It's good, I think," Osrith added, patting her hand, for Edra was giving her a worried look. "Not leaving?" Edra protested. "You've only just arrived." "If Constantine needs me to," Osrith replied. "But, that is not the something I mean." At that moment, Sainid opened the courtyard door, smiling warmly at Osrith. He knew. Osrith remembered. and it was as if his life had been free of joy up until he had discovered her pregnancy, and now it was his whole life. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder as Osrith thought about the whisper of the idea, back when she had last been at Dunnottar. Osrith looked at Sainid, and could not help but smile back. She could feel herself relaxing in the fortress, where she had lived for so many years, and she was going to give birth. That the child's father was not with her felt the least of her problems then, with late autumn sun falling on Dunnottar's grass giving the stonework a rich, deep, welcoming hue. Days like these were meant for exploring the world, and seeing new things. Well, she had, Osrith supposed, old was new to her. Go to get your work, Osrith told Edra, and gestured towards the chambers in the fortress. I will come to you once I have spoken to your father. It is a blessing to see you, girl, Sainid told her, holding out his hand, presumably to escort her in. If it was as an acknowledgement of her pregnancy, she would not be able to keep from laughing. And she smiled, as Constantine's headguard pushed open the door. Through it, Eswi stepped through, making Sainid start as the door was thrust open. Comrades both, the men grinned at one another, and Eswi clapping Sainid's hand. He is in a good mood, Eswi added, and looked at Osrith. I guess it might have something to do with that big bag of silver you have in your hand, Eswi added, and Osrith considered that she had got on with him well, considering he had been stalking her in secret. You look well, Osrith, Constantine said, and nodded to Sainid. I trust you did not wait long this morning? You never have to wait. This is your home. Next time, come in. Beside him, two other warriors stood, and on the throne where Mary used to sit, was Ildub. It was no wonder Edra could not find her dearest friend if he had been learning his role beside his father. She watched as Sainid stood beside Constantine. Was it her, or was he rather pleased with himself? Osrith was used to the king's general being laid back, unflappable and entirely to be relied on, and to see him all lighted up was unnerving. Unless it was her, as Miral had said, that pregnancy changed the way you saw things. So Osrith found herself willing her time passed quickly and her mind and her body could then recover their strength and had decided to take things on face value now, rather than rely on her instincts. Which would be, Osrith would later reflect, a mistake. My captain, and cousin, Angus, Constantine introduced Osrith to him. I have had the fortune to have a reliable man guiding Strathclyde now and the Mormor ship is in safe hands. Angus, a huge, red-headed man, bearded and jovial, nodded to Osrith. Constantine put a hand out to the other man. Phelim you know, and governs our lands in the east. Phelim, Pictish, butty blonde hair and round face nodded in recognition. My cousin, Eswi, you met on the road. It is in the hands of these two men I place you, Osrith, Constantine continued, but not yet. Rest a while, recover from your time in Mercia. You have plenty to tell us. Osrith had, and relayed it, more or less, to Constantine, from her leading her division, following Eardwulf as instructed, and killing him for his murder of Ethliad. It was not easy to give the bold facts in front of Constantine and his men, but there was no use in concealing it. Eswi would have already told him. And my brother accepted the throne in America, and its lordship. But, I am given to understand from Eswi, he abdicated in favor of the Lady Ethelfled. That man. Constantine shook his head, pretending to sound jovial, and Osrith knew immediately that he was rattled. Spy indeed, if he spills his secrets so readily, eh? I took my opportunity to flee. Though not from my killing of the Lord, I paid Virgil to Eardwulf's sister, and was absolved of the crime. From the money you bring me? Constantine nodded to the bag Osrith was carrying. From the money I was paid for being made captain again. I was needed and it was the perfect cover to ascertain information. Osrith glanced at Phelim and Angus, and then down at Ildub. The boy resembled his father as Selach resembled Mary, and he listened with the same head knowledge as Constantine did. Do you wish me to reveal them before your court? The king frowned at the word. Your Mormors, Osrith attempted again, and this time Constantine smiled. Court implied a sharing of power, and now power was consolidated into one king, one throne, one crown in Alba. It was a sensitive issue. Mormons were more like highly held general lords, who had autonomy over a region. They could act as the king, but could not make the king's decisions. In fact, it was almost as if a proto-hierarchy, like Irian with their high kings, was beginning to form, and Osrith smiled at the high king. Indeed, Constantine nodded. Please tell us about the independence movement. Which persons instigated that? A many number of people worried about the takeover of a land by another monarch. I know it will happen, Osrith mollified, for that was just what had happened with Dulriata, Strathclyde, and Pitland. Strathclyde, Osrith knew, still made noises in this direction, the division since at least the time of Eochaid and Giric, who had turned the tables and taken Dunnottar, and with it, the kingship of the Gaelish Dulriata and Pitland. They had tried, at least. But the people are still bombarded with Danish raids at the border. They needed someone to make them feel safer before they can think about unionism. You are such blessed, Osrith added. We are indeed, though the blessing comes from the wisdom of my generals, Constantine added, nodding to Angus and Phelim. A strong nation is one who acts together. Edward, or whoever builds the land, what is its proposed name? Inglarland, Osrith supplied. Whoever builds Inglarland, would be well to follow suit. And I hope they are slow enough that I can reclaim our ancestral lands. He looked at Phelim, the Pitlander. Your ancestral lands, he added, and yours, Constantine added, which is why your brother, Wigger, had been in regular contact with me, to negotiate. Constantine leaned forward and lowered his voice. I have agreed that his Bibbenberg lands will remain intact when I take the rest. In exchange for no resistance in the other places. Constantine smiled, widely. The wall is the natural boundary, could anyone else dispute, when it is a physical boundary between the two nations? None could, Osrith supposed, but that left many Saxons in lands where, if the culture were to change overnight, would be expected to speak Pictish and obey a king in Alba. Osrith could not imagine peace with such a proposal. It was as outrageous as if we had claimed and was unresisted in taking all the lands to the Forth. Culdees, a gleaming heart of the Irish Church, would be in his, if that happened, and Osrith could not think that the Picts, speaking their version of the Cymric language, would lie down and accept that either. Which is why, Osrith thought, there should be a third way, one suitable for both Bibbenberg, and therefore whoever claimed lands there, and the other Alba. One thing Osrith was sure of was that Eothwic with the Danish and Norse claims were out of the question. A third territory would not result in a good outcome for either Alba or Bibbenberg, and therefore Inglarland. You just watch that woman try to take all of Inglarland, Osrith said, with Edward. And was then cross with herself for being so blunt. But Constantine was not taking it amiss. Indeed, he was smiling, which was Osrith's first clue that something unusual was going on. Constantine rarely smiled at her. Accept it, and work it out later, Osrith told herself. If she did, it would be a blessing, he replied. How so? Osrith took in his features, his long nose, his bright, grey eyes, his black hair with thin lines of silver in it. He was younger than Osrith. If Constantine looked middle-aged, how did she look? It has been suggested, Constantine continued, and Osrith noticed a parchment, folded in three, in her hand. That the Lady Ethelflaed's daughter went missing on her wedding day. It is of no consequence to me, Constantine added, and Osrith immediately thought to Ildub, his son. To marry potentially the next leader in Mercia meant influence in the Saxon courts, although that potentially meant influence of Saxons and Angles in Alba. Constantine said nothing for a moment, and the line was dropped as he asked, the Lady Ethelflaed, she is a strong ruler? A strong warrior? She fights in her own battles, does she not? She has developed a skill, Osrith admitted. Though she hadn't much of one when I had to rescue her from captivity from the Danes. Constantine's eyes widened for a moment, then he reset his face. Osrith had told him, and he was probably realizing she had, too. She fought bravely at Tenholg, Osrith conceded. And she has a nephew. King Edward's son? Aethelstan. Osrith had seen Aethelstan, with Uhtred, as they had gone on the run. He seemed to be a quiet child, not much to say even when they had all ridden south together from Wilm to Saltwick. Thinking, Osrith mused, like his grandfather thought. There was a mind there, Osrith considered, and Aethelstan intended to use it. And what of our own borders? It was Osrith's turn to ask the questions. But if Constantine was irritated by her presumptuousness, he did not show it. Domhnall is busy with the Uineel peace, the one being created with the Norse. Osrith nodded, before, a little shamefacedly, pulled out Domhnall's letter. Constantine received it from her hand without a word, or any expression at all. Uinst has been defending the east coast from Harold Finehair's incursions, but they were not as bad, so I hear, as the raids on the west coast of Mercia and Northumbria. Anlaf Guthfrithson would take Eofwick, Constantine told her, though he is making slow progress and has not yet left his ships. Osrith, Constantine said, and a different tone entered his voice, one she had never heard him use again. My plan is simple. I wish the Norse who come back from our cousins in Ulster to settle, not in the dull Rioter lands, but south, where Anlaf is now, freeing the northern lands of our enemy. There is a precedent, they call that city, Jorvik. We will encourage this. Osrith watched as he shifted in his throne. Then Constantine's voice raised its volume, and he got to his feet. Danes and Norse at Eofwick. It would be something that her brother would not act against. And if it was done for the purpose of resistance to Saxon and Anglish expansion, then Osrith could not find a reason to oppose this part of the plan. We were here before the Saxons, the Angles, the Jutes, here even before the Romans. Those from the Latin lands never came here, never came to Irian, and we grew strong, and hardy to invasion. Now we fear invasion of the Say, but more than this, Constantine added, you know better than anyone what the Cymric call Wessex, and Mercia, Cent, East Anglia, Northumbria. They are the 7 kingdoms. In the Cymric tongue, they are Logr. Lost lands, Osrith translated. Lost lands, aye. They mourn at the name, Constantine added. Offa of Mercia sought to emulate the war builders in Northumbria by a huge ditch to prevent a horsed Cymric man from riding clean into his kingdom. Clever. Constantine began to walk around his men, and his son, Ildub's sharp, grey eyes never leaving his father. As England is being annealed, I have put in motion plans to drive out the Saxons from these lands, back over the sea whence they claim to have Britons reclaim their birthright, their lands, our lands, everything. And Constantine was looking pointedly at her as a roar of approval came from his generals. It was outrageous. Audacious. How could 400 years of Saxon invasion be solved by deporting people back over the sea? How many Saxons, Angles, Jutes had been born here, how many generations? How many, like her, were of mixed heritage? Osrith's father was of Ethelfrith, right back to Ida the Flame-Bearer, yet her mother was of Arian, of Sht, the ancient and noble land where, rumour had it, the most noble Cymric lived, from where Patrick, taken as a slave only to return to Irian and establish Christianity, had come. Osrith gave Constantine a long look. Even Constantine himself had Saxon roots, through Oswy, who married a daughter to the king of the Picts. I speak to you for you are of Sht, Constantine reminded her, and then, suddenly broke off, ordering his men, and Ildub too, to leave the throne room. Osrith shuddered, and Constantine got to his feet and crossed to her, supporting an elbow. That was the first sign. Years later, Osrith would think back to that moment. A Constantine changed to her, warmer, considerate of her. Changed from the man she knew who was indifferent to her and made her life difficult. Later, she would know what it was he believed, but then, Osrith assumed it was her perception of things, and complied without thinking. She hated pregnancy. Osrith was to remember, it made her body ache and her mind dull. Come, sit with me, Osrith, he asked her, and gestured to chairs used by minor royalty when the throne room was being used for a general assembly. Osrith nodded, and allowed Constantine to escort her over. She was tired, and had not rested, or even eaten, since she had arrived back and her head was beginning to feel a little lightheaded. "Does what I say alarm you?" Constantine asked, his official demeanor coming away like a mask, and he smiled a little to Osrith. "Yes," she conceded. "You would be a fool if you think not, but I do not expect this plan to fully pay off for many years. But I need 2 key people to be with me, in principle, before I carry this out. One of them is Hywel Dda. He was at Tenholg, I believe." Osrith thought back. It was Hywel, though she did not know it at the time, who had pushed her out of harm's way when a Norseman was about to smash in her skull. Only when the battle was over did she know it was good King Hywel, as he stood watching his men collect the plunder and the slaves. "You speak Cymric," Constantine said, his hand on her forearm. "First, I wish you to rest, for a day or 2, and then to Cymru, to Dubwarth, Hywel's kingdom. I wish you to take a letter." Osrith turned to him, narrowing her eyes. "You sent me away before to Cymric lands, and I was fooled into thinking I was discovering intelligence when all the while I was being set up for a different purpose." Constantine did not reply immediately, nor did he seemingly react. However, Osrith knew his inaction and silence meant she had made a point. "Caeligwylid? Guthard? Domhnall?" she prompted. And Constantine drew away from her, his blue cloak, once that of his cousin, Domhnall, when he had become king, shimmering in the candlelight. "It was my idea, Osrith," Constantine confessed, at last. "Not for you to be sent, but for Guthard, Harthknutson to be married to an ally. He serves a purpose. He holds an area of land that would fall into chaos without a leader with no vested interest." He looked at her, his grey eyes holding her gaze. "I was so angry when I found that Domhnall had chosen you." Constantine laughed as if remembering, and the memory had taken off its bitter edges filtered as it had been through time. But conciliation, not offence, was in Osrith's heart now, and she looked at her once friend, her now lord. She could never think of Constantine as her king. That place in her heart was Domhnall. He was the king she had sworn to. Constantine was the little boy she had saved by hiding him away from the Norse when Ivar the Boneless had attacked Dunnottar and the pilgrimage party come from Chaldees, with whom Osrith had been placed. "It was a long time ago," she replied. "I wonder sometimes, if we could just see our lives made with different choices, whether we would prefer the ones we first chose." And Constantine turned back to her. "I would have killed Giric myself if I had known what he would do to you," Constantine went on, grimly. "And I will try to kill you, Tad." "No," Osrith said, softly. "No more retribution. Not on my part, in any case. Kill him when you next attack Bibbenberg, or deny him the fortress at least, for it will feel like a living death to him." Then she looked at him, narrowing her eyes. "These men, those who would travel with me, Phelim, Angus, Eswi, why should I put my trust in them? Why should they not ride with me south to Guthard, or quietly have me killed?" And the sudden hurt in Constantine's eyes made her start. He had changed, he had grown softer with her, and this was confirmed when he touched her arm. "Osrith, please, trust me. These men I would trust with my own life. Eswi, Phelim, you have fought beside you before. Angus is a Cambulay, again a cousin of mine. But his family have long held a blood feud with the Griocchia family. Should anyone wish to harm you, Angus will have already killed them." But Osrith felt herself shaking her head. "I can fight," she declared. "And I know that," he replied, softly. "But, you are with child, and I would not have you fight. My men are your protection." "I need no protection," Osrith protested, but Constantine's hand had dropped to hers, and his touch drew out her protest, and she fell silent. "I would have you get to Hywel Dda in one piece, deliver my message and return to me, to have your baby." Constantine said the words so softly that Osrith hadn't been sure at first whether he had said anything at all. But he had replaced his hand on her arm and was looking at her face. "I confess, Sainid did tell me. I was angry, and threatened to make him kill you when you returned unless he told me what you would not. I, for one, am glad you saw sense," Osrith replied. Was this really Constantine? He had seemed to have changed in the matter of months. I simply wished to carry out my duty, for Edra, she added. Though I have never bowed to you, or to Alba, I would not break my word to you, Constantine. The word came softly, and he took up her hand again. And I will not ask you to put yourself under unnecessary strain, Constantine added. You will have the finest care. Then I am sorry that I must break my service to you, Osrith replied, realizing then that she was bitterly sorry for herself as well. But Constantine waved a hand, as if losing a spite of pregnancy and birth was of no consequence to him. An idea was trying to form in Osrith's mind, but was too complicated for her tired mind, so she let it go back into the maelstrom of thoughts. What I need is high-willed Edias and a Welsh position. The kings of Powys and of Gwynedd will fall in with what High-will says. Constantine got to his feet and began to pace, a habit that Domhnall had when he was thinking as he spoke. What I need is ... What I propose, he continued, is an alliance, of sorts, that should either of our lands be invaded, we will send men to aid their defense, and they us. The say should never be allowed to enfold us into their union of kingdoms. So, Constantine added, I should have you sail from Glashku, Diffenwell is cocksure but will let you pass to the Clyde, then down the coast until you get to Abergwaun. That is where he will meet you. You are to take a message, a letter. You will have Eswi, Phelim, and Engus. But Osrith had only heard the one word, and was already feeling sick at the idea of travelling by boat when she needn't. She had taken a horse for good reason, even if the land, which was fraught with dangers, was riskier. Why do you think he will listen to me? I am a Saxon, after all. You are also a Briton, and that is of the most consequence. You are of Vsht, in your ancestry. That means a great deal to High-will. The Britons settled in Cumbraland first, before travelling to Wales, Strathclyde, Pitland, Elmet. Vsht is the ancient origin of their race. You are a Briton, even if your father was a Saxon. Do not underestimate your role in carrying this message for me, Osrith. High-will respect you for your heritage before you even open your mouth. That is a good then, Osrith thought, because feeling as she did then she wondered whether she could string a coherent sentence together in English, never mind a persuasive one in Cymric.